As they say in hockey, let's do that hockey.
Play a full 60 minutes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep it simple.
Get pucks deep, putting the puck deep.
Put pucks in deep.
We got to keep it simple and just get pucks going forward.
Getting into the forecheck.
We got to keep playing aggressive.
Trying to take away their time and space.
We're focused on tonight. We just got to stick to our game.
Travis Kelce made his on-stage performing debut as a background dancer in London. Parades are roaring through America right outside of Matt's back door, and the Florida Panthers, as well as our co-host Jenna Bonomo, are Stanley Cup champions. Welcome back here, episode 2 of the Fifth Liners podcast, and celebrating the Florida Panthers, and especially Jenna, who's only going to be on for a little while as she's been touring the country for the last 2 to 3 weeks since the last time we talked, just about, and joined by Matt Leonardo as well. Matt, we'll start with you. You weren't on air with us, but you've been a big part of the start to this podcast here. Welcome to the show officially, and I think this is the second time that we're going to welcome you because we pre-recorded the interview with Sarah Fillier that's coming up as well. But first, we'll have you introduce yourself here.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. My name is Matt Leonardo, pretty avid hockey fan. If you couldn't tell by the jersey, I thought I'd do the proper intro here. Graduated the University of Minnesota, living outside of Boston. Casey mentioned in the big Celtics parade this past Friday. And really happy to hop on here and give some insights on the Stanley Cup.
And the star of the start of our show here, Jenna Bonomo. Jenna, what's been going on in your life? A busy travel schedule. How many flights have you hopped on? How many different airplanes over the last 10 days?
To be honest, I couldn't even count. There's been so many. There's been so many days where I've been in Florida for less than 24 hours just for a game. So I've lost quite a bit of sleep. As you can see, I'm in my bed already with pretty much my pajamas on, my Carter Verhaeghe shirt. So I'm pretty exhausted myself, but it was definitely all worth it. So yeah, let's go Panthers.
Just got home from Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final, and she's going to give the sad puppy dog story about how stressful her life has been that she's had to travel around following the Florida Panthers. But take us back. We'll start, I guess, with last night there, and you're in the stands right in the arena and sending all the videos of your guys lifting the cup, and not the easiest of games. I think it was the last 5 Game 7s have all been 3+ goal blowouts. They didn't quite make it that easy for the fans in the arena, but I'd say almost even more electric the final moments there as your team lifts the cup. What was it like being there in person?
One thing I do want to put out there first is immediately when I got there, I kind of felt like so disappointed because I was seeing like so many more Oiler fans than Panthers. I was getting so nervous. I was like, are they going to outnumber us? Are we going to be loud enough? And so that was like automatically like making my heart like absolutely pound, like on top of all the nervousness that I had. And, I wasn't feeling too confident going in there, but after the first and second period, I was getting a little bit more loose. So I was getting some real excitement, but I don't know. The last 5 minutes literally felt like an hour to me. But it was fun in the beginning. I got to meet Paul Bissonnette. Got free pizza, thank you, and a free shot of Pink Whitney. So that was exciting. But it was just like kind of sad to see walking in and hearing people kind of like chatter about it. So many of the season ticket holders sold their seats for that game, which is such a disappointment because they didn't get to see their team lift the cup. Everybody kind of just got nervous and scared, I guess, after Game 6 that they lost, and they didn't think they would bring it back home.
Probably almost made for a more electric atmosphere there. It was like a neutral site, which I obviously as a Panthers fan, probably not what you want. But how about the start to that game there? They score first, get scored on right away again, and then the eventual game-winning goal by Sam Reinhart there after about 5 minutes of constant pressure, and then a breakaway the other way, and Reinhart buries it to finish.
I think it was 5 breakaways that were scored on us, which is very scary and very bad on our defense part. That was really disappointing. I knew as soon as he was coming down the ice that it was going to go in, so that was not good. But we recovered from it. I didn't think that the Panthers were gonna hold their lead, and I also didn't think that my score prediction would hold as well. I definitely thought it was going to overtime, and my heart was pounding the whole time. But I'm so glad that the boys got it done, and I'm so glad that I can say that my team has finally won a Stanley Cup.
We'll have to go through the scores here for the end segment of the show, but it certainly was not me who led the pod in guessing the correct series score. I think I went 2-5 throughout the Stanley Cup, and for those who follow my Twitter, felt the pain with my daily released picks that were on fire through the Western Conference Final and went straight into the ground through through the Stanley Cup here. And unfortunately, a lot of that was mojoed by Jenna riding the Panthers to finish it off there in games 4 through 6. How about the stress that the fan base had to feel there? Everybody pretty much sold the series there after 3 games, and then it just kept going, and by game 7, it seems like a lot of the momentum was in the Oilers' favor there.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not the type of person to like, I don't know, my dad and I always watch the games together, especially the away ones when we're just sitting at home and we never usually talk. It's always just silence. This this time, 4, 5, and 6 was just screaming the entire time, just immediate frustration. It was really like tough to see, and I usually don't see that from the Panthers. They're usually, these last couple of years on top of it on their game. And there's a thing called the comeback cats. And I always thought every game, 4, 5, and 6, oh, it's gonna happen. Let's wait until the third period. They're the best third period team. And I just waiting every time for them to tie it up or to send it to overtime, and it just never happened. So I was getting really nervous. I was like, they could take this right now, a reverse sweep. And it was really, really tough for me. And I think at one point I was just like, do I even want to go to game 7? Because if I go and they lose, I'm going to be so disappointed and honestly more embarrassed. So I was really struggling with that factor. I was like, I don't know what to do. I mean, it's a privilege to be able to go to a Stanley Cup final game 7, but if they lose, I don't know. That was tough.
Last year, all the struggles of going down to Vegas, losing that cup, and then now kind of the same thought here. And you end up going, obviously, to game 7. That might have been one of the greatest game 7s with all the breakdown of the rest in between, and what the energy they brought out there was absolutely phenomenal. Now, after last year's disappointment, how about the excitement? You probably couldn't hear many of the interviews, but some phenomenal interviews, the emotions of the players, and you're pretty close with the team. So finally seeing that breakthrough and some of those personalities on the team that have been there, worked so hard for it, never got there. What was it like being in the arena when the cup finally got lifted?
Well, it's funny. We sit next to a lot of the players' families, so we're always just kind of chatty when they come up the stairs and leave at random points of the game. Before the puck drop, Brandon Montour's father actually came up to us, and my dad goes, "How's he feeling today? Like, what's the mood?" And he goes, "He was so crabby this morning." And I was like, "Oh, that's not good." And then we had the Gadjeviches next to us, obviously a Utica connection, so they were super nice. But all of them were just so nervous for their families and for their players. So definitely, I think that a lot of them deserved it. Two players that I want to point out is obviously Barkov and Ekblad have been with the team since they were drafted, so definitely very well deserved. Kyle Okposo, I think it was 17 years he's been waiting for this, and Bob 14. So definitely well deserved. They stayed with the organization and worked through the really tough times that I've been through with the organization, only pulling 13,000, 11,000 some nights. It was really like heartbreaking to see like a team with basically no fan base at one point. It was just whoever was a tourist there was going to go to the game if it was for the Rangers or for the Devils. And we have a lot of definitely away fans coming. Obviously Edmonton a lot in Game 7 too. So definitely well deserved. And I think we've built an incredible fan base too. So it's really exciting to see a Stanley Cup finally come to South Florida.
I know after a long day of travel here, you're itching to finally get to bed, but you're getting right back on a plane here in a couple of days, heading down to the Stanley Cup parade, and we'll have you running our social media for that day, sending all the videos and the excitement around town for that. What are you looking forward to most upcoming this Sunday?
I guess just celebrating with everybody. I mean, I've really only been able to celebrate with my family here, so I'm excited to see everybody. And not everybody got to go to the games, so I can't imagine how many people are going to be there for the parade. And just really seeing the boys soak it in, I guess. I've seen so many videos of them at Elbow Room or on the strip, so it's really incredible to see, and I can't wait to see what they do for the parade. So I'm really excited for that too.
Matt, pressure's on you here. Jenna, we'll let you go to bed, and thanks for opening the show with us.
Yep, thanks guys.
Okay, Matt, we'll take it away right with Game 7, I guess, and 7.66 million viewers, which was up from the 7.1 million that started after Game 1. That is the fourth all-time highest viewing for a hockey game, and this was the second highest overall average since the Bruins St. Louis series that went to 7 games. You look at all the anticipation of Canada trying to get their first cup in 30 plus years, Florida's quest for their first ever cup, which they end up getting last night in Game 7 and a 1-goal differential that all came down to the last seconds. How important was this series for the promotion of the sport of hockey? You saw Frank Saravelli tweeted out an awesome picture of an old Sports Illustrated article that said, hockey's hot, basketball is not, and kind of implying that this is back to the feeling of, I think it was the 80s or the 90s when hockey was really starting to boom, and it seems like we're getting to that point again.
You know, you get really lucky with how the NBA finals kind of went with 5 games. Felt like Boston really dominated that. You look at the Western and Eastern Conference finals, both being sweeps. You know, there was way more hockey available to fans, and the fact that it lasted a few more days past the NBA finals is all the better. I think the fact that you've got the United States team and the Canada team is absolutely huge. You know, the entire country was rooting for Edmonton, even though, you know, maybe some Calgary fans have a little bit of shade, but I think it's massive for the sport as a whole. I think, you know, if Gary Bettman could have wrote the story, he couldn't have done it better with, you know, McDavid kind of carrying the team on his back all the way back to Game 7. Knowing him, though, the cup had to stay in the U.S. So Florida getting it done at the end there, you know, tons of pressure and opportunities for Edmonton. You know, you think back to where there was an absolute cluster in front of the net and 3 minutes left, and McDavid got an open net and somehow can't find it in. Bobrovsky keeps it out, and you know, you could just feel the intensity inside the ring from your seats, even though most people were hoping Doc Emmerich was going to be on the mic instead of Sean McDonough, but I think he's still doing a great job nonetheless. But yeah, I think overall, this is just massive for the sport. Continuing to grow, you know, coinciding with the PWHL, growing the women's game as well. I think hockey is really in a good direction right now.
32 Thoughts talked about it on their podcast earlier today with celebrities all over from different sports talking about Game 7 and some of the NBA stars from the Celtics talking about how crazy the sport of hockey is and how trying to understand the rules. And then some analyst, Dan Orlovsky was one of them, you know, analyzing Connor McDavid's play and kind of saying how that could have been a legacy game, but where was he? And one of the big things that was almost detrimentally noticeable to the Oilers right down that final run, and Sean McDonough talked about it for the Americans that were listening on ESPN, just how dead those Oilers guys looked, and you know, the definition of giving it your all, and it really showed in the emotions that you could see afterwards. But they just could not get the puck up the ice there in the final couple minutes right after they pulled the goalie. And fortunately for them, the puck doesn't end up in the back of their net, but really no pressure with the extra attacker on the ice at all.
Yeah, and it almost looked like, you're hoping Bouchard was going to get the puck up to somebody. It was standing behind his net with 25 seconds left, just hoping somebody was going to get a good outlet for him, and nothing ended up opening up. He gets a pass over to Draisaitl, just kind of falls off his stick and into the zone, and they were able to kind of just die the clock out in the corner. But you mentioned, that fatigue and that stamina. Connor McDavid's playing 20, 25 minutes a night since opening day in October. It's tough to play 105, 110 games and play 20, 25 minutes a night at the forward position. And they've relied on him the entire year. They were never in a spot where they were comfortable, right? They started off so slow that they had to kind of work their way back up. And, after they lost that San Jose game and they fired Jay Woodcroft, like, this team has been go, go, go for so long. You could really tell that with the last 3 minutes of the game where they weren't able to get really any opportunities on Bobrovsky.
It was a story of two parts there for this series, and pretty much the entirety of the hockey community throughout this series after 3 games. Games 1 through 3, Florida absolutely playing Panthers hockey to the definition of what Paul Maurice has inscripted in the culture of this program, and just suffocating all the life out of the Oilers. And with the exception of late parts of that third period, maybe the last 4 minutes or so, when the Oilers got it back to 1 goal in the end of game 3 there, but really didn't put much pressure on. It was completely dominated by Florida. Then you come back games 4 through 6, it's all Oilers. And finally in the 7th game, Florida got back to kind of what they're good at, and just choking out the life of Edmonton, their low scoring, low chance game. And they're able to come away with it. But it started with how amazing Florida was. They get their first cup in franchise history, so obviously they don't care too much of how they did it. But then on the other side of that, with Edmonton's comeback, it's one of the most storied comebacks in hockey history. It's just the third time ever in the NHL a team's gone down 3-0, come back to a game 7. And the Oilers, unfortunately, the second of those teams that were unable to finish it out. The last, Detroit in 1946, the only team to ever win from down 3-0 in the Cup final was the 1942 Toronto Maple Leafs. So Canada still has to wait for their Cup. We'll still have to wait for a team down 3-0. But it went from a series that had no life, a series that seemed like it was all blowouts, kind of still that way after Edmonton blew out a few games, to one of the most thrilling finishes in Stanley Cup memory.
Yeah, it was great. Those first couple games, honestly, watching the games, Edmonton looked like they had possession of the puck, but Florida did exactly what they do best, and they suppressed opportunities. They kept them on the outside. Bobrovsky had eyes on every single shot. Nothing that was getting to the net was really something that was dangerous. And then once game 4 kind of opened the floodgates, you start to feel the pressure if you're the Panthers, right? You lose 8-1. McDavid is the hottest player on earth. He's got, at that point, I think it was 42 points in 23 games, which is just absurd. So how do you stop that, right? And the one guy who's able to do it, playing off like time in and time out, was Sasha Barkov. He shuts down Zibanejad in the conference finals. He shuts down the Marchand Pasternaks against the Bruins, and time again, he really made an impact. And I think for game 7, it almost seemed like, that home ice advantage really showed, because every time McDavid jumped over the bench, 16 in red was going with him. So I think the Panthers got back to what they were looking for there, and were able to get the job done in game 7. But, overall as a series, it was a lot of fun, back and forth. Storylines were just writing themselves all the way up into game 7. And, one way or the other, either Canada's going to lose again, right? Or Florida's going to blow a 3-0 lead, and they're never going to hear the end of it. So all in all, it was a really great Stanley Cup.
Oh, Paul Maurice, he wins his first Stanley Cup after being the third most, or after coaching the third most NHL games all time behind the bench. Finally gets that cup. Also joins Pete DeBoer in the Game 7 undefeated run. He's now 5-0 in Game 7s throughout his coaching career. The interviews he gave with the media were absolutely phenomenal after being probably the most prominent voice in the media throughout this entire season. And from a media side, personally, my favorite coach just because of the positivity and the way he always interacts with the media. But you could tell how much it meant to him. His wife is out there crying with him. He finally gets the cup there and he whispers down to it. And they talked about him being a guy who's a big fisherman, and he said that was the hardest catch of my entire life. And it's hard not to root for that. Either way, there was going to be storylines like that, but that's certainly one of the top ones that it's just a feel-good story for Paul Maurice, who finally gets his Stanley Cup.
Yeah, and like you said, how do you not root for this kind of guy, right? Falls off in Winnipeg and in the winter of 21 and doesn't know if he's going to coach again. And, he makes the return back to Florida after they had some shuffling around in their on their bench. And he wins. All he really does is win. When he's done, he's going to probably have his name in the Hockey Hall of Fame at this point. This kind of cements that, in my opinion. It's great to have a winner behind the bench, especially when he cares about every single guy that stepped foot on the ice for the Panthers this year. It really is a great scene for hockey right there.
You talked about Alexander Barkov. He kicked off the finals with a 2-point outing, both coming on assists. He has the game-winning goal in Game 3, and he now is the first Finnish captain to lift the Stanley Cup, and all while going head-to-head, eating minutes on ice and playing against those top line players. He was one of the top talked about players for the Conn Smythe. It eventually goes to Connor McDavid, and hard not to give it to McDavid, but easily it could have gone to Barkov, depending on, if you throw out 97 on the other side, it's Barkov's trophy to lose. But an unbelievable playoff for him. And as Jenna said, a guy drafted to the Panthers organization. He was there through all the tough times where there was nobody in the stands, even the first playoff runs there when they won the President's Trophy and still couldn't fill the stands there, to now having a packed house, sellouts all year long, and they win the cup, and he's the one lifting it.
You talk about earning it. That's that right there is all you can ask for. Drafted by the team, been there for all the lows, been there for all the highs, and he's been the face of that team ever since he put that C on his chest. Eating up 20, 22 minutes a night against top line guys is not an easy feature. And so it is great to see Barkov kind of come full circle with the organization that he's been with for so long.
Right along with the series of 2 parts, Sergei Bobrovsky felt the ups and the downs for sure of this Stanley Cup, and I'm sure he's just as happy to be walking away with the Stanley Cup than he would have been to have the Stanley Cup and the Conn Smythe. But he was the odds-on favorite by a mile through 3 games to take the Conn Smythe after a Game 1 shutout where he made 32 saves, becomes the oldest goalie to open a Stanley Cup final with a Game 1 shutout. And then not only that, but only lets in 1 goal in Game 2, where the Panthers then became one of only 5 teams since 1943-44 to hold their opponent to 1 goal or fewer in the first 2 games. That joins the 2008 Red Wings, 2003 Devils, 1957 Montreal Canadiens, and the 42 Toronto Maple Leafs. And to make that even more impressive, the last time that the Oilers were held to 1 goal over a 2-game stretch was all the way back to February of 2022, and that was over the regular season. Bobrovsky outstanding through those first 3 games. Then he gets pulled in Game 4, and a lot of that obviously is to just give him rest. And I think the biggest thing that stood out to me was the leadership quality there. He could have moped around, he could have went down the tunnel, done anything else, and some things that honestly I've seen goalies do that wouldn't be touted as the greatest leaders in history. And instead, he takes the helmet off, he high-fives the guys on his way off, he says, "I'm good," and he stands in there with the team as they get routed 8-1, struggles in games 5 and 6 going into 7, and then he comes back holding the Oilers and that touted offense to just 1 goal as they lift the cup, and he's the second one that gets to touch it as Barkov hands it off to him.
And again, well-deserved there. Talk about a guy who has seen a lot of hate from the media. You sign a goalie for over $10 million, you're going to have to perform. And, he started off a little shaky on that contract, but, start of last playoffs, you could tell that he really is earning that money and then some for the Panthers. He was on his head for most, if not all, of the playoffs. Had a couple of bad games, and as a veteran goaltender, to be able to go in there and come back in Game 7 after what he did in Game 4 is unbelievably impressive. A lot of people are also talking about seeing him in the Hockey Hall of Fame as well. I completely agree based on his longevity, his ability to win and when it matters most, especially here, finally being able to lift the cup. So overall, I think this team isn't where they are without Sergei Bobrovsky.
Evan Rodriguez might be the greatest signing to the Florida Panthers throughout this cup run. He was signed by Bill Zito to a 4-year, $3 million average contract going into this season. And going into Game 2 of the Cup final, had 11 points in 19 games. He ended up to extend that through the Cup final. He had 7 points on 4 goals and 3 assists in the final. He had points in 5 of the 7 games and had 2 games with multiple points that included a game-winning goal in there as well. And Rodriguez, a guy coming out of the Pittsburgh Penguins organization. He's played alongside Crosby. Now he hops into the Panthers and right onto the power play and played such a big role in energizing the crowd, especially through those first 3 games. He had 3 goals in the first 2 as the Panthers went out to that early lead.
Yeah, and you root for a guy who's earned every single minute that he's gotten, right? He's jumped around the league a little bit. He was in Buffalo during some rough times, got to go over and play in Colorado with McKinnon and Rantanen, and now he's over in Florida playing on a line with Barkov and Kachuk. So, looking at a guy like that, those are the kind of guys that help move the needle for these teams. The guys that aren't making, $8-9 million, but are able to skate with those star players and kind of complement their games. And I think Evan Rodriguez did a really good job on that, playing with Matthew Kachuk. Kachuk being a physical guy, driving the play and having Rodriguez kind of there to kind of supplement that game was really incredible for that. So, great to be the first Evan on the cup. I think I heard that about 25 times during the broadcast, which I don't know about you, but it didn't feel too necessary. Sorry to any Evans that are listening out there, but there's your guy. So there's your idol.
It's still a pretty cool feat. I'd love to be the first Casey on the Stanley Cup someday, but unfortunately my playing skills have been brutally pointed out that I don't think I'll be getting there anytime soon. Matthew Kachuk was a villain to his own team in the media throughout this series, and especially as it got to Game 5, where he made the statement, "We're not losing this game," and that was in the morning media session, well ahead of where Connor McDavid and the Edmonton Oilers group could hear that. They did not go ahead and win in Game 5. They also did not win it in Game 6. Kachuk had a phenomenal game in the one where he called the win with 2 points on a goal and an assist. Unfortunately, it ends up coming back for Game 7 today. This morning, he was the one running the Stanley Cup into the ocean, so he gets the last laugh. But what were your thoughts there when you first heard that news break that he's calling game, and then it obviously motivated the Oilers where that didn't happen?
Yeah, it's always tough to do that. Different guys have different leadership strategies. Some like to keep it internal. Some like to lead by example. And then you got guys like Allen Iverson who won't stop talking in the media about how great everybody is. So I definitely think Kachuk, that's just what he was trying to do to get his team fired up and ready to go. Obviously, hindsight's 2020. It didn't really work. But yet again, who's swimming with the cup in the ocean? So I think overall it did the job, to say the least.
Definitely not you and me swimming with the cup, but maybe we'll get there someday. Also pretty cool on the Kachuk front, in a Boston relation to you here, him and Jason Tatum, who were elementary school buddies, both win their respective championships. Tatum and the Celtics hoist the NBA trophy, and Kachuk is a Stanley Cup champion. So big congrats to both of them. And Matt, maybe for us, someday we'll be winning a beer league and an intramural title or something like that.
That's all you can ask for nowadays, I think.
Send it over to the Edmonton side. Chris Knobloch, a huge story throughout the entire playoffs, and the coaching strategy was eminent how important he was to that Oilers group. And through 93 games coach, he became just the fourth coach in NHL history to reach a Game 7 with less than 100 career games behind the bench. Unfortunately, falls short of the mark of Stanley Cup, of winning the Stanley Cup, but it's still an outstanding season for a guy who came in the middle of the season after the Oilers fired the coach, and then they bring in Knobloch, and especially noticeable throughout the playoffs how important he was, changing up the lineups, bringing guys in and out, and being able to adjust to certain things going wrong. They fell behind in just about every series they played, with the exception of the LA one. And even in the LA series, they lost one of the first games at home there, where it was 1-1 headed onto the road. So for Knobloch, hopefully a pretty long career coming up here. Matt, what stood out most to you through his first season here as he'll head into the offseason now officially as an NHL head coach, rather than last year where he was still in juniors?
Yeah, I think one of the big things for head coaches in the NHL is getting guys to mesh, right, and getting the locker room motivated. I think those are two really huge factors. And how you do that, so many people wonder how you figure that out, right? Some people are more laid back. You got John Tortorella that's in your grill the entire time. So, being able to go into that room and when they were, down for the count, people in Edmonton were furious about how Jay Woodcroft left that. They were down. I think they were tied with San Jose with points, 15 games into the season, and the Sharks can make their run up to the Cup, but Edmonton had the talent and a pretty good head coach here in Knobloch to be able to do that. But like you said, definitely, 93 games coach. I think that's going to be a much higher number when we look back 10, 15 years from now. So
one thing Matt left off on his introduction is that he's a diehard San Jose Sharks fan, so that'll be coming up quite a bit in the upcoming summer. Matt, McDavid breaks Wayne Gretzky's record for the most assists in a single postseason. He eclipsed the 32 assist mark back after game 4, excuse me. And that is a record that had stood since the 87-88 postseason. Also very interesting that McDavid and Gretzky reached that mark both in their 9th season of being in the NHL. He finishes the postseason with 42 points, 34 of them coming on assists. Also had back-to-back 4-point games in games 4 and 5. He is the first player in NHL history to have back-to-back 4-point playoff games. 14 points throughout the postseason that came in elimination games. He's also the 6th player in NHL history and just the 2nd skater to win the Conn Smythe without winning the Stanley Cup. The first since 2003 as Jean-Sébastien Giguère for the Devils was the winner of that on a losing team. He did not come onto the ice to accept the trophy. So before we get to all the outstanding nature of that accomplishment, your thoughts on him not coming out to take a picture with that trophy? Obviously, it's understandable, but as the captain of the team, certainly something I would have liked to see at least come out, and even if you're not smiling for the trophy, come out. There was a lot of Edmonton fans out there. Just take a picture with that thing.
Yeah, it's obviously, you understand both sides of it, right? Where, how hard is it to go out there and skate and accept your quote unquote silver medal? But time and time again, you look at people in the Olympics grab it and throw it straight in the trash can before they even get off camera. So I think it's definitely a difficult situation with your McDavid, right? You put your heart and soul into that playoffs, and, they awarded him the award because he was quite literally the best player in the playoffs. Obviously came up short. Hockey's a team sport. It's not a one guy can really carry you. It almost happened. But I think personally, I could have seen it going either way. I think the voters got it right in terms of who should have won the award, though. I mean, if you look at it, who was the best player in the playoffs, it'd be really hard to not say Connor McDavid. But I think it's one of those things that you can kind of see why he wouldn't want to go out there. But I'm pretty sure Gary Bettman's a little furious that he was standing out there with the trophy by himself.
With all the chills that go behind the bright storylines of the Florida Panthers and some of the players and personalities there, you got to be just absolutely gutted for Connor McDavid, who puts on a performance of a lifetime there and comes up short. And it obviously showed. You could see him crying on the way off the ice and bent over the bench. They gave it absolutely everything they could. Of that list of accolades that we just read off, from throughout this entire run, the power play that pretty much runs through him and taking all the attention to free up those other guys, all the assists he's putting up with the attention on him and being able to find gaps, find passes, and also scoring in some pretty clutch moments for them. Matt, what stands out to you most out of it might as well be Gretzky, out of McDavid's performance this postseason?
I think the big thing is no matter what situation it was, he was making the biggest impact. It didn't matter who they were playing. It didn't matter if it was game 5 and they were up 7-1 or if they were down, 4-1 in game 3. He was out there going 120%. And he was out there, almost every other shift, it felt like. He's playing 20, 25 minutes a night. He's putting everything he has into this after he's willed this team from down in the dumps all the way to almost winning the President's Trophy with 110 or so points in the regular season for Edmonton. So I think the big thing is just the eye test. It's one of those things that, you're not going to see that on the stat sheet, but he clear as day is just at least 3 gears above everybody else on the ice. And it's just unbelievable to watch. And it really is truly cherishable to be able to get the opportunity to watch him go out there and skate every night.
He's now played 74 playoff games in his career, and a crazy stat, he has the same amount of 3+ point games as games with no points. And you might think that's a lower number than it is. 18 is the number of games that he's scored 3 or more points in, and that's not counting the outstanding number of regular season that would probably dwarf that number by a mile. McDavid is the Conn Smythe. We don't have a picture of him next to the trophy, but that one will go down in history again. Just the 6th player and 2nd skater to get that honor without winning the Stanley Cup. Zach Hyman, a guy who was an exceptional ad and one of many ads that sent this Oilers team above and beyond. They get him from Toronto, and he made his mark on top of the crease. Hyman, with 16 playoff goals, now is the most among any active skater in a single postseason, and he passes Sidney Crosby from 2009 and Alex Ovechkin in 2018. Both of those guys went on to win the Stanley Cup in those seasons, and unfortunately for Hyman, he does not have the same legacy, but regardless of that, an absolutely outstanding feat. And Matt, what an addition he was to that Oilers team this season.
Yeah, you talk about guys that put the puck in the net. At this point, Zach Hyman's up there with anyone in the league right now. I mean, it's one of those things that people always like to talk about who you're playing with, but at the end of the day, it takes skill to play with skill, right? And if it were so easy to get the feed from McDavid and put the puck in the net, back in 2017, Zach Kassian would have been a 50-goal scorer. So I think it's an incredible feat for Zach Hyman here. Being in the names of Crosby and Ovechkin is never a horrible thing if you're playing in the NHL. So very impressive playoff. Unfortunately for him, though, like the rest of the Oilers, just came up a bit short.
Connor Brown and Adam Henrique, 2 guys that played lower line roles here that made major impacts, especially in the final. And how about Connor Brown is where I want to start. 5 points in the Western Conference final and Stanley Cup final, 2 goals and 3 assists. And throughout the regular season, he had just 4 goals and just 12 points. And he didn't score his first goal as an Oiler until March 13th. He came off an ACL surgery at the beginning of the season. He started the season, but the ACL from last year, and a guy who played with Connor McDavid and Jr., that was all the hype going into the season. No one talking about Zach Hyman regardless, but they thought Brown was going to be the guy to take that huge scoring role in the big step. They thought Brown was going to be the guy to play on the same line as McDavid. Brown was going to be the guy getting all the hype around him. And then he took heat all season. All Oilers fans wanted him out of there, wanted him donezo, and no scoring from him for a while. March 13th was where he got his first goal. He went on to put 4 more from March 13th to the end of the season. But then throughout this run to the Cup final, absolutely boomed, and especially as a shorthanded weapon. Obviously, the ACL has kind of recovered, and that's an injury that a lot of guys say takes over a year to get comfortable on skates. And throughout this run, he went from a guy who was going to probably be signing a deal that maybe he wasn't too proud of to a guy who just made himself a heck of a lot of money throughout the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and you always root for a guy coming off a really serious injury like that to kind of thrive. And, through the first half of the season, me and him had the same amount of goals at that point. So it's a really, great thing to see him kind of turn it on in the last two rounds when it really matters the most. Especially, he signed a prove-it deal in Edmonton. He jumped from Ottawa, where he kind of made his name in the league, went to Washington and didn't really pan out there. Signs this prove-it deal in Edmonton on a 2-year entry level, right? And blows his knee out in the first year. And after about a half a season, it seemed like it was a complete write-off, where he might not even be in the U.S. playing hockey next year. But, you see a guy playing on the penalty kill and giving quality minutes on a third line. That's what slots you in the lineup, especially in the playoffs. Killing penalties, and we'll probably talk about it later, is a very important thing, especially when it comes down to the Stanley Cup final. And Connor Brown is one of, if not the best penalty killers on the Edmonton Oilers for this year. So great to see a guy, coming back from an injury and really making a name for himself here.
Another guy doing the exact same thing and probably making himself a lot of money coming up. That was a trade deadline acquisition coming from the Anaheim Ducks, Adam Henrique, who joined this Oilers team, and a big piece of the penalty kill, a big piece of shorthanded scoring, 3 points in the Stanley Cup final, and he had 2 goals out of those 3 points. Both of his goals went down as game winners. So talk about a guy coming up in clutch moments. Matt, how about Henrique's addition and the way they went out to get him and the way that panned out? And it'll be interesting to see how his offseason goes as well.
Yeah, you give up a first pick for somebody and you expect big things. And for a little bit there at the start of the playoffs and towards the end of the regular season, Henrique was skating on the third line and not really getting the opportunities that you would think, you're moving your first round pick for. But then he shows as a veteran that he's able to make a presence in so many other ways. You mentioned on the penalty kill and a couple of goals here for game winners in the Stanley Cup. So similar to Brown, I think he's really positioned himself here in free agency, and looking at a veteran there, you really hope they can all get to the Cup and win it. I think the last time he was there was back with New Jersey in 2012. But, those kind of players, they get moved around at the deadline again. So it wouldn't shock me to see Adam Henrique on a penalty kill next year in the Eastern or Western Conference Finals for sure.
One of the main questions we brought up on episode 1 here in our Cup final preview was whether or not Stuart Skinner was going to be able to handle the goaltender battle, handle the pressure of the Florida Panthers, and handle going up against Sergei Bobrovsky, who is arguably, I'd say, the second hottest, but could be argued as the hottest goaltender in the NHL, Igor Shesterkin, who Bobrovsky outdueled in the Eastern Conference final. I would put ahead of him. But, even going through to past game 3 where it was 3-0 there, Colin and I were going back and forth on Twitter, and Colin said there was no chance that Skinner was going to be able to hold up. He was pretty proud of that take through 3 games, and Stuart Skinner comes roaring back. And an interesting stat, prior to game 7, Stuart Skinner in games 4 through 7 this postseason was 10-0, a 1.50 goals against average, a 9.40 save percentage, and that joins an elite list of goaltenders who also had 10-plus wins throughout a single postseason, games 4 through 7. That list being Martin Brodeur in 2012, Corey Crawford in 2013, and Jordan Binnington in 2019. Unfortunately, just like Zach Hyman and the feat he accomplished, Skinner doesn't come out of it with a Stanley Cup above his head. But I would argue that answers the bell, especially going into next year. He's your guy, and he can handle it.
Yeah, and you remember back in, I believe it was the second round, Calvin Pickard was starting 1 or 2 games there. It was a big question mark as to whether Skinner was going to be the guy moving forward. Looking back now, it's a little silly, ridiculous kind of question, but Skinner was letting in some soft goals, and it was really, it just didn't seem like he was himself. He's had some stretches where he's looked really good in Edmonton, and he's had some stretches where he's looked really bad in Edmonton. And you always root for a guy like Skinner who's, spent so much time in the AHL, perfecting his craft and worked his way up and got to the starting goaltender position with the Oilers this year. And I think there's no question going into next year who's going to be between the pipes opening night.
One guy we did not mention in another star-studded story is Kyle Okposo, who announced his retirement last season, decided to come back one last year to give it a shot with the Buffalo Sabres as the captain of the team. And as it got towards the trade deadline, they did him a favor, giving him a chance with a cup contender. They send him to Florida. Okposo ends up making the run. He was in and out of the lineup, but in the lineup for Game 7. And the story about him talking to his son about how he used to sit in the driveway and cheer when he would make goals against his buddy, that it felt like Game 7 and they pretended that it was the Stanley Cup. And he said, I was so nervous going into this game. I was telling my boys this story. We went out and played mini sticks in the driveway, and I got that feeling like I was a kid again to get the inspiration coming into this game. He will end his career, if he decides to, a Stanley Cup champion, and an absolutely phenomenal story for a guy who definitely deserves one here.
Yeah, and he played like a kid. It was awesome to see. The most electric guy on the ice was the 37-year-old who, formerly Minnesota Golden Gopher, I must add. Congratulations to Mr. Okposo there. But no, he was a huge spark plug for the Florida Panthers there. You saw him, finishing his checks against the wall, really hard on the forecheck, just doing everything that you would want out of a fourth liner. And something that we haven't mentioned that I really wanted to during this conversation here about the Florida Panthers, there's so much depth that they're able to move in and out of the lineup, and you really saw that with Okposo, and how much energy he had, and more the lack of energy from Edmonton. You look at guys like Nick Cousins and Steven Lorentz and Ryan Lomberg and guys that are towards that third and fourth line, being able to, really put pressure on the back end of Edmonton and force turnovers and get the puck back in the sticks of the Florida Panthers. I think that really showed towards especially the end of Game 7. But you see a guy like Kyle Okposo go out there and really give it his all. It's awesome to see. So if he ends up going out on top here, very happy for him.
Penalty kill was probably the number one story of both of these franchises getting their way to the Stanley Cup final throughout this playoff. And again, back to Chris Knobloch and the hiring of bringing him in. He was a juniors coach, no NHL experience. A lot of people flamed the hire, and a lot of people also thought the only reason they brought him in was because he had experience with McDavid. All of that, all the noise behind the scenes gets put to rest as he leads the team to the Cup final, and I think cements a long contract hopefully to come for him. But you look at the struggles that team had. Edmonton, after 20 games, was so bad they had to fire the coach. The penalty kill was faltering. They were one of the worst in the league. They finished the regular season just 79.46% on the penalty kill. That was 15th, dead in the middle of the NHL. Florida was 6th overall at 82.47%. And then you move forward to the playoffs, and both of these teams were right on top. The top two, Florida second in the postseason. They were 75 for 84, just 9 power play goals against, 88% overall. Edmonton, 94.29% to finish the playoffs, 70 for 74. And an even more impressive feat on top of that, they were a net -1 when going shorthanded, thanks to 3 shorthanded goals throughout the Cup final, just 1 power play goal allowed. And they finished their final 50 penalty kills of the season, 49 for 50 at 98%. Think back to November. Imagine saying that the Edmonton Oilers would be playing in Game 7, and not only that, but they would be 98% on their last 50 penalty kills. Fortunately, they come up short. Florida's penalty kill just about as good. They only allowed 2 goals throughout the entire Cup final there to Edmonton, who was the top power play in the postseason. And Matt, the the definition of defense wins championship really stands true here when we look at both sides into this cup final.
Yeah, and you look at some of the power plays that both teams were playing against, it makes it an even more unbelievable feature, right? In the finals, they're playing each other, which are both very electric power play ones. Looking at the East side, you got the Rangers, you've got Tampa, you've got Boston, really good power plays historically. And then you look over on the Western Conference, you got the Canes, you got the Canucks, you've got the Stars, who were red hot before they ended up falling to Edmonton. I think a lot of GMs are going to look at this series and say, this is what is going to make a difference, right? You know, if you're going to take penalties, it's going to happen, right? But the fact that they were -1 net for the entire postseason, it really makes a difference and kind of carries the Oilers there. So I think a lot of general managers are going to look for some of those third and fourth line guys who are going to be huge staples on the penalty kill and maybe a little bit of a pay bump for those kind of guys who've been underappreciated in the past.
We're going to cover all of the teams coming up here for our episode that will come out on July 1st, our free agency preview. But when you look at both of these teams, Edmonton probably, I think, has one more run at it they'll still have their top 5 set in next year. But for Edmonton, some UFAs upcoming: Connor Brown, Carrick, Fogle, Gagne, Henrique, Janmark. Janmark, another guy who we didn't talk about, but goes right in there with Henrique and Connor Brown, outstanding shorthanded guy and a depth player that really shined in that cup final, probably made himself quite a bit of money. Corey Perry, you got to wonder how much his career has got left in it. Desharnais, Stetcher, and Pickard, all UFAs. Holloway and Broberg are RFAs. So, Matt, when you look forward for the Oilers here to get back to this point, do you think any of those names really stand out that matter to you, or do you think with the top 5 guys who all eat over 20 minutes a night locked in for next year that they'll be able to form something around them?
Yeah, I think we'll see if Ken Holland's going to be the guy there. There's been rumors on whether he's going to be around as the Edmonton GM. It sounds like he might not be around for the draft, apparently. So it'll be really interesting to see who has the keys to the car here and what they want to do with the team. But I think the big thing for Edmonton is still finding pieces that are going to mesh around McDavid and kind of complement that team and kind of fill out that bottom 6 so that you're not relying on McDavid on the PK like they didn't have to, due to the fact of guys like Adam Henrique and Connor Brown being able to step up and eat those PK minutes. So I think it'll be interesting to see what kind of names they go after, as well as some of the guys. You know, you look at a guy like Dylan Holloway, who had a little bit of a spark game there with 2 goals, I believe, in Game 4, and Philip Broberg, who came into the lineup after being scratched earlier on in the postseason. What kind of roles can they carve themselves out coming out of training camp and into next year to kind of alleviate some of the desire and need to go and sign some more depth pieces?
For the Florida Panthers, it feels like this might be it and going out on the top of the mountain for a lot of these guys. And it'll be really interesting to see the roster they can construct with some of the guys on their way out who are going to be due quite a bit of money if they can't convince them to stay in the tax-friendly state of Florida. But big UFAs coming up: Sam Reinhart, Nick Cousins, Ryan Lomberg, Steven Lorentz, Okposo, who's likely retiring, Tarasenko, Stenlund, Ekman Larson, Kulikov, Montour, and Stolars, all are free agents. RFAs, Anton Lundell, and Josh Mahura. So it's going to be pretty difficult for the Panthers to keep anything that looks remotely like the roster we saw make this run here. Pretty much their entire D-core up for grabs, as well as their top scorer in Sam Reinhart.
Yeah, and like I mentioned earlier, depth is a huge reason the Panthers had the energy and had the edge in Game 7, and you just listed pretty much half of that depth that's going to be gone and out to a free agency here. I think the big thing to look at is what do you do with Sam Reinhart? It's so difficult to not sign that player to 50 goal scorer potential and somebody who's going to continue to be a face of the franchise there. But he played himself into a pretty large contract here, especially hoisting the Stanley Cup at the end and ultimately scoring that last goal for the Panthers. So I'm really interested to see whether he's going to be putting on the red and blue next year, if he's potentially going to be moving elsewhere. I think that's the big name. If I were the GM, Bill Zito, I think that's the first guy that I'm kind of tackling right there and then kind of building the team out around from there.
Coming up next is our PWHL segment. We'll welcome in Jake Swanson to the show. as well as an upcoming interview with our first ever guest here on the Fifth Liners podcast, Julia Gosling. Matt will be back on for that, a pre-recorded interview that's had to wait, unfortunately, about 10 days here as we thought the Cup might be over after Game 4. And Matt and I will be back to close off the episode, all to come here on episode 2 of the Fifth Liners podcast. On to the PWHL now, and with that, we welcome in Jake Swanson, our PWHL correspondent here. And Jake, as we did last week with the rest of the co-hosts, let you introduce yourself here first before we get into all the exciting details with the draft and the inaugural season.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. A really pleasure to be here. And my name is Jake Swanson. I'm also an alumni of Clarkson University. I was Casey's partner in the booth for the better part of 4 years. We would switch back between play-by-play and color. And yeah, I'm living in Cleveland now, and I'm working in cybersecurity at the moment, but I always have time to watch some hockey, especially the PWHL.
And a lot of the names on the list, very exciting for Jake and I. We've seen plenty of them play, and a lot of them we know fairly well out of the ECAC. And a couple of Clarkson Golden Knights that went in the later rounds. But Jake, we'll start with the inaugural season here, and they've already released some information about what's going to be coming in season number 2. Training camps are set to start in mid-November. Game number 1 will be sometime in early December, which is a month earlier than season number 1, and the schedule will feature 30 games instead of the 24 that they played last year. Going to season number 1, it was Minnesota taking the first ever Walter Cup. PWHL Minnesota, unfortunately, is in the headlines right now, not for the reason of winning, and a couple of unfortunate events back to back right before the draft in about a 2-week range after winning the Cup. And it started with general manager Natalie Darwitz, who is one of the most famed women's hockey players in Minnesota hockey history, being released from the team in Minnesota. Team reports saying that there was some tension between her and the head coach, Ken Klee, which was the main reason. And the head coach and Coach Klee backing a lot of the team's key players that Darwitz was apparently against having on the team. And again, the reports saying that there was an obvious reason that it wasn't going to be able to go forward. One of the two is going to have to go. Unfortunately, it's Darwitz. And from building the Minnesota team to the inaugural championship, and then right away she's out, Jake, and Minnesota will have to start over.
Yeah, Casey. I mean, this is not exactly how Minnesota wanted their offseason to start. They're just on the high, winning the Walter Cup, the first ever Walter Cup, and they did it in style in a 5-game set, winning in Game 5. And this just, Darwitz, there was some comments made apparently between the two, and Minnesota opts to go with Ken Klee. And honestly, as someone who's seen organizations do this in the past where they go with their head coach over their GM, it's really just a chemistry thing. I mean, the GM don't really see them day to day, especially in the locker room. The head coach, obviously, you're going to see them a lot. And Coach Klee is, like Casey said, had the backing of a lot of those key players. And someone like a Taylor Heisey, like, that's your first overall pick from the first ever draft and one of your playoff MVPs. Like, you have to keep her to keep that franchise going, to try and keep that dynasty going that they're hoping to start here, especially with some of their picks in this draft that we'll get to. But yeah, it's an interesting one, and we'll see how Minnesota comes out of it and see who they hire as their replacement.
The second PWHL draft, which took place about 10 days ago from when this podcast will air, pending the Stanley Cup result, June 10th, was in St. Paul, the host of the Walter Cup champions, and the fans let the management know their feelings of Darwitz's relief, and one of the most prominent faces in Minnesota women's hockey history, no longer with the Minnesota organization. And the draft controversy didn't stop there. With the second round pick, Minnesota selected Brittany Curl, a University of Wisconsin graduate, strong forward who brings a large scoring threat that Minnesota obviously can use. But Curl on some of her social media accounts apparently showing a boycott of Target for carrying transgender community products, and also some tweets on her account that promote anti-transgender messages. A lot of people obviously highly critical of Minnesota's pick, as the community at whole in the PWHL very supportive of the LGBTQ, and also a lot of the players part of the LGBTQ community. So that stirred things up, and Curl this week releasing a statement saying, quote, "My social media activity has resulted in hurt being felt across communities, including the LGBTQ and BIPOC individuals. I want to apologize and take ownership of that. I have family members and extremely close friends who are part of these communities, and I love them very much." And also talking about how this is an opportunity for her to grow both in humanity and love. As she said, Jake, for Minnesota, obviously not the time they needed to continue to stir the pot here, but hopefully for Curl, now as she's released her statement, the PWHL has kind of backed it up and saying this is an inclusive culture. Hopefully a good opportunity for her to learn from that. Boston fell in 5 games to the Walter Cup champions, Minnesota. That's the next team we'll take a look at. Megan Keller and Aaron Frankel named to the PWHL second team. Rumors were swirling around the draft that Amanda Kessel, who announced her return to professional hockey after a couple of years off, might be offered the Minnesota general manager position after she was not drafted in the early rounds. She was projected to go in the first round, probably between the 4 and 6 picks. Hadn't gone in the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, or sixth round. So a lot of people thought there was going to be an announcement coming that she might be the next general manager. However, she ended up getting drafted to Montreal in the final round, and it became released later on after the draft that she'd made it clear to a lot of teams that the only team she wanted to go to was Boston. That's where her sister-in-law is the head coach. To be contract eligible, she had to declare for the draft, which was the reason that she did not just go straight into free agency. And Montreal really making it interesting by picking her 2 picks before the end of the draft, which would have pushed her to free agency. And even further, the PWHL does not allow for future draft picks to be trading. So any trade package that would send Kessel to Boston would require the teams to work out a player-for-player contract trade. And Jake, for Boston, obviously a good season getting themselves to the final, but some work to be done here going into next year for the management.
Yeah, Boston, I was really impressed with how they played in the Walter Cup final. I mean, they were really testing Minnesota at every single turn. And I mean, one of the reasons, Aaron Frankel, I mean, you mentioned second team, all PWHL, and 53 and 56 saves respectively in those last 2 games, and one of those being a 1-0 loss. And you can't ask any more from your goaltender. I mean, we saw her at Northeastern many years being the heart and soul of that team. And during the regular season, she had 2 flat goals against average with a .929 save percentage. So she was outstanding, and I think Boston has found their goaltender for a long time to come. And regular season wise, I really was impressed with Alina Muller and Megan Keller. Keller, again, did really well in that Walter Cup final, and Muller did as well, but they led the team with 16 and 15 points respectively. Really like what I saw out of them, and I think they're going to lead the team forward as well. And something interesting, too, that I saw, and a name that's, again, familiar to us, Casey, is Lexia Gia was traded from Ottawa to Boston towards the end of the season. She had 3 points in 7 games and 1 goal in the playoffs, but she is a really good young player that is really good at taking faceoffs and is really like a bulldog in that offensive zone. So I'm really interested to see how they use her going forward, and especially along the likes of like a Lauren Gable or a Hillary Knight, and see what they can do maybe on the power play.
Gia also made a good name for herself as a social media influencer and has been very active in talks about the new league as it was being formed. Originally was committed to play in the former league, and then when that dissolved, showed all the struggles of being a professional player as they had all the doubts about the upcoming league, and then also going through the draft process and the successes of the inaugural season. And Gia was one of the front runners in showing the power of women's sports through the PWHL. Montreal is next on the list, and again, they stirred up quite a bit of drama by picking American star Amanda Kessel, who only wanted to go to Boston. They also surprised everyone with their third round pick, drafting Abby Boreen. And then in the seventh round, by taking Kessel, they passed over Quebec native Emmy Facto. Other details have emerged since the draft that Boreen might be trying to get a trade back to her home city of Minnesota. She was one of those players like Kessel that had emphasized her want to play for PWHL Minnesota. She lives right next to the XL Center. Also is enrolled in the pharmacy school at the University of Minnesota, where she had planned to attend in person next season. That might all get shaken up if they can't work out a trade there. But Jake, for Montreal, the main star being Marie-Philippe Poulin, who was drafted to her hometown there in Montreal and really shined this season.
Yeah, Casey, and I was lucky enough I got to see the PWHL game in Pittsburgh between Toronto and Montreal, and seeing these Montreal players, they have a really good thing going. Toronto may have won that game, but I really liked what I saw, especially out of Poulin. 23 points in 21 games played, over a point per game player, and she's getting ready for her 9th pro season. I mean, she started all the way back in 2007, 2008 with the CWHL, and she's just keeping it going. And she doesn't look like she's slowing down, especially on the professional stage and on the national stage as well. Something I saw interesting, too, at the end of the season, the Montreal went and signed the 23-24 MVP of the SDHL, Lena Lupum. And apologies if I get that pronunciation a little bit wrong, but she had 145 points in 152 games played as a forward. And I think she's going to be taking the league by storm next year. I think she's my early dark horse candidate for Rookie of the Year and that undrafted free agent signing. But yeah, and of course, again, another player close, near and dear to our heart, Casey, is Erin Ambrose, the former Clarkson blue liner, the defender of the year, and very well deserved. 2 out of the 3 nominees were Clarkson alum. It was Erin Ambrose and Ella Shelton for us. And Erin was just outstanding. I mean, 18 points in 24 games played. She had a huge 4-assist game against Minnesota in March, and she's just exactly what you want out of a blue liner, someone who can stand up on the blue line but also make plays happen. She's a classic two-way defender right there. But Montreal, I will say, I think overtime is definitely their downfall. They were 2-9 when the game went outside of regulation. And they really just got to hammer down, either get that win in regulation or be able to produce something in overtime or the shootout.
A lot of these teams adding threats that we'll talk about when we get to the draft here, but they'll certainly look for some scoring into next season. Toronto is next, and the number 1 overall seed in the regular season. Unfortunately, they fall outside of the first Walter Cup final. And with the PWHL playoff format, they had the choice of who they wanted to play. They chose to play Minnesota, and obviously, unfortunate pick as Minnesota goes on to win it all. They get reverse swept and knocked out in the first round. On the positive side, though, Natalie Spooner is the league's first Billie Jean King MVP award vote winner.
Yeah, Spooner was outstanding this season. And, I mean, 27 points in 24 games played. She led the league in points, and her face-off game was absolutely incredible as well, 58.3% in the face-off win percentage. And that's exactly what you need out of your first-line center, someone who scores and someone who wins it in the dot. And Casey, with Toronto, you got to wonder, is this the start of the President's Trophy curse, PWHL style? I mean, we've seen it in the NHL where the Stanley Cup hasn't been won by the President's Trophy winner in a number of years. But 17-7-0 on the season. Again, really good regular season. They in the first round of Minnesota, they did really well to go up 3-0, but the last 3 games, they just lost their offensive production. And I'm not sure if it was a chemistry thing or the lines just weren't feeling right, but they only had 1 goal in those last 3 games. They were shut out twice and put up 1 goal in game 7. And I just don't know what happens, but hopefully they'll come back stronger. I mean, we know that they can produce. You got superstars like a Sarah Nurse, like a Natalie Spooner, and you build around those. And we'll talk about later in the draft. I think they got a lot of really good young players coming up as well. And one other thing to mention too with Toronto is, again, it seems like a lot of these teams are finding that backstop of a goalie, and this team found it in Kristen Campbell, the goalie of the year for the PWHL, a 1.99 goals against average and a 925 save percentage. I mean, again, you can't ask much more out of your starting goaltender, and they've got a couple other goaltenders as well right behind her just in case, but I think Campbell is going to be the future for Toronto between the pipes.
After one season, the future of women's professional hockey in Ottawa is up in the air now. Ottawa will tear down TD Place Arena, which is the current home of the PWHL Ottawa, and also the OHL Ottawa 67s, which was previously the tenant of that arena. And the plans were put in place to tear down the arena before the PWHL. That is expected to happen in the not too distant future. The plan, again, was in place before the PWHL. The new arena plans to have 5,500 seats, which is likely too small for the PWHL Ottawa, and it would crush their fan base, who averaged almost 2,000 fans, more than that in their capacity this season. A couple of their games over 8,000 fans per game, and their season record was near 8,500. The response of the mayor's office, the government getting involved, saying that the justification for that is the average attendance of the PWHL at 54,48 for the season, but the numbers on that are significantly driven down by the American team, specifically New York and Boston, and really New York. New York's team averages 2,496 people in the stands. If you remove that, the New York home games, the league now averages 62-46, and even further, if you remove Boston and New York together, the Canadian teams in Minnesota average 69-82 for their attendance. So, Jake, a nerving time to be a member of Ottawa, as they are now going to have to look for a new home, and hopefully that comes in the city of Ottawa.
Yeah, Casey, and I mean, this is it's a tough situation for all parties involved, and we want to see this game grow as much as anybody else. And unfortunately, excuse me, the city of Ottawa, they have their own agenda. The PWHL wasn't there when they were considering this, so it's a tough sell, but hopefully, like you said, they'll find a new home close to home. And Ottawa itself, kind of a middling season for Ottawa. They had some flashes of really good play. They had some flashes of really bad play. And the record shows that they were 9-9-6 on the season. And they had some decent production from their top point getters. And they just couldn't quite put it all together to create a season like a Toronto's, where they were 10 games above 500. Brienne Jenner, 20 points on the season. She led the team, and she was very good, and we know she's good. We've seen her on the national stage and even back further in her collegiate days. And I think they really just need a couple of bona fide goal scorers, and I think they'll be doing okay. Their blue line has been really good so far, and I like the makings of their goaltenders. They've got 4 goaltenders rostered right now, and any 4 of them would be a solid starting goaltender for them. I think they just need to put up a couple more goals and they'll be okay. Their slow start definitely hampered them. They only won 4 out of their first 13 games. So after that, they went on a tear, don't get me wrong, and they went back up to 500, but it took a lot of effort and a lot of work. So their goal this season: start hot, stay hot, and I think that's what they need to do. Another area that I saw that they could maybe improve on, and I think they might have improved on it a little bit during the draft as well, was faceoffs. The only player above 50% in the faceoff dot was Brianne Jenner, and she was 54.3%, which is good. But everybody else in that center core was under 50%, and you really, really got to win those faceoffs, especially in the offensive zone, especially on the power play. That's what dictates the flow of the game, and I think that's what kind of set them back in the beginning of the season. So we'll see what they do to address it in the rest of the offseason. Like Casey said, free agency opens up here soon, so we'll see if they add any more face-off winners, goal getters, and I'm really excited to see what Ottawa has in store.
So we'll get to the draft. They got Danielle Serdachny, a certified goal scorer, and as well a major face-off threat from Colgate. Last place in the PWHL was New York, and they are in the top pick, which is very valuable with who they end up getting in Sarah Fillier. To add salt on the wound there, New York had the worst attendance, as we mentioned, in the Ottawa ruling there, but the light started at the start of the season where Ella Shelton scores the first ever goal in PWHL history on January 1st to kick off the inaugural season. That was New York's first pick in the inaugural PWHL draft. They won that game 4-0 over Toronto, who ended up being the number 1 overall regular season seed. So one of the 7 Toronto losses came to the last place finishing team. New York's core also very young, and a lot of them coming back for the season. Carpenter, Rock, Shelton, Zandy Hart, Bourbonnais, and Eldridge are all on 3-year contracts. Also have Jaguar, Downey Landry, Saulnier, Onard, and Hobson, who are on 2-year deals still to go. So a lot of important players that they don't have to worry about contracts for at this point, Jake, but a lot that needs to improve towards next year is they were one of the 2 teams that didn't make it to the postseason and also finished at the bottom of the table.
Yeah, Casey, and that it always stings, especially in a big market like New York, not making the playoffs, and especially being in a 6-team league where only 2 teams don't make it. It's just so demoralizing. But I think New York has a really good start of where they want to go, and they've got a lot of really good players, really proven players on this roster. And I mean, we've seen a bunch of them from Ella Shelton to Elizabeth Jaguar, Jill Saulnier, Jamie Bourbonnais, Micah Zandy Hart. I mean, they've just got a star-studded lineup, and it really surprised me how bad it was for them, especially towards the end of the season. Because, I mean, you look at this team on paper, especially like on the national stage, and you see what they put together, and it's a really good lineup, but it just didn't mesh for whatever reason. So we'll see what they can do. Their team leaders in points were Carpenter and Shelton at 23 and 21 respectively. So again, just under a point per game for them, and they did what they were supposed to do. I mean, Carpenter up for the league MVP award as well as the Forward of the Year award. Shelton up for the Defensive Player of the Year award as well. And again, like I said, they have a lot of really good players. We just got to see if they can mesh. What kind of got them on the decline that I noticed was they lost 7 in a row, like right towards the middle end of the season. And that just kind of derailed everything that they had going. They had a couple really gritty games at the start of the year. That 4-0 win over Toronto to start the year had to set the girls buzzing. I mean, that's a huge, huge start for them, especially against Toronto, who they know is star-studded. And what I noticed is they definitely, I don't know if this was maybe a team mentality or if this just kind of happened the way it happened, but they only had 7 overtime games this season, 5 that went to overtime, 2 that went to the shootout. And I don't know if they just decided as a team, like, hey, let's do everything we can to stop this in regulation, or if it just was the way the puck bounced. But I think if they keep that up, it's a good look, especially for their health going forward in the future. But yeah, I'm looking forward to see what kind of talent they bring in. Again, we saw some with the draft, but I'm excited to see what they can put together for next season.
The PWHL draft, especially exciting for us as ECAC commentators. 4 of the top 6 out of the ECAC, and the top 3 in a row are players that we're unfortunately a little too familiar with, and being that they score quite often against our Clarkson Golden Knights. But we'll break down the top 6, and obviously there's plenty more stars to come in the rounds after that. Unfortunately, in the thought of time, we won't go through all 42 players that got drafted, but some great storylines. One of the favorites of mine that I got to shout out is a close to home one, and Stephanie Markowski and Brooke McQuigg, roommates their freshman year at Clarkson, going back to back in the 4th round, I believe it was. But pretty cool there on a string of Golden Knights that all went in between rounds 4 and 5. Markowski, Bernard, McQuigg, and Dominique Petrie all headed to the PWHL, and a couple of them to be future teammates. But the first round pick and the first overall, Jake, was New York. Sarah Fillier, the pick for PWHL New York. She led Hockey Canada in goal scoring back in 2022 in her inaugural Olympics at the Beijing Olympics. Also at Princeton, has been a standout ever since she's been there. She took that 2021-22 season off to be centralized with the Canada team, and came back for the last 2 seasons. This year in 2023-24 at Princeton, she was 3rd in the NCAA in goal scoring, which ranked as an ECAC first team all-conference member, an ACHA second team All-American. She was also a finalist for the Patty Kazmaier Award, which is given to the NCAA's best player. And Jake, we're pretty familiar to seeing her score goals, especially in ECAC play. But she's had a couple of daggers over her time against the green and gold.
Yeah, Casey Fillier, she's just been a familiar name in our line of work for the last 3-4 years. I mean, I remember one of the first games we worked together was the ECAC championships out of Cornell, and where Clarkson lost to Princeton. And Sarah Fillier and her sister Kayla Fillier were on that team, and it was just really fun. Even though it was on the losing side, it was still fun to see her play. I mean,
I don't know if I remember it as a fun memory.
Yeah, no, Casey was not talking by the end of the 3rd period, but it was still an experience, and I think Sarah's going to do really well in the big market in New York. Again, Princeton player, so she's somewhat close to her alma mater, so maybe she'll get her team out to a couple of games, and I think she's going to fit in really well alongside a lot of those teammates. I'm excited to see how her and Shelton really mesh. I know Ella didn't really get to see her play in the ECAC, but I think their styles of play really complement each other.
Ottawa adds a major face-off threat as well as scoring and certainly physicality as they pick up Danielle Serdachny with the number 2 overall pick. Serdachny scored the overtime game-winning goal to secure the gold medal in the 2024 IIHF Women's World Championships in Utica about 2 months ago, back in April. Like Fillier, a front-runner for the Patty Kazmaier, she was the runner-up in 2023, a top 10 finalist this past season. She finished 4th in the NCAA in assists, 5th in total points, 10th in goals scored, and an ECAC All-Conference first teamer, as well as ACHA first team All-American member. She captained the Colgate Raiders for the past 2 seasons and captained them to their 4th consecutive ECAC tournament championship. We had to watch every single one of them go down, and in the last 2 years were knocking out Clarkson in the championship game. Serdachny, a prominent member, 8 ice time, a physical force, a 2-way player both ways. And Jake, that's going to be an awesome addition to the PWHL Ottawa franchise.
Yeah, Serdachny has just been, dare I say it, a thorn in our side for 4 years, and I'm really happy that all of her work has paid off because she deserves it. And as much as we would have liked to have at least one of those ECAC championships against Colgate, I think that she just works so hard to get to her level. And I think Ottawa's really going to benefit from that, especially in the faceoff dot. I think she's going to be really, really good there and on the power play as well. She had a lot of power play goals in the ECAC. That was her bread and butter. So I'm excited to see where they put her in the lineup, and I'm excited to see what she does in this next season.
Claire Thompson, the number 3 overall pick and heading to the defending champions in Minnesota. The former Princeton Tiger was a graduate in 2020. And after being the captain of the team, Jake, you mentioned back in the ECAC championship that year where they knocked off Clarkson, the first ever conference title for the Princeton Tigers, where she led the team in scoring through that playoff run. She also appeared alongside teammate Sarah Fillier in that 2022 Olympic Games, most recently playing for the PWHPA Sonnet, and a player that's been out of the NCAA game for a little bit, but has certainly not had a lull in the professional play, and a big addition there for Minnesota.
Yeah, Thompson, just a really good all-around player, and again, another Princeton Tiger. Princeton has produced a couple of really good prospects in the last couple of years, and Thompson and Fillier are just the top of the list. And I, again, really excited to see what she does with Minnesota. Again, it seems a little bit unfair to me that Minnesota gets such a good player after winning the Walter Cup, but that's how it falls. I think that her national stage experience and her PWHPA experience are really going to help. She's been in medical school actually for the last couple of years, and now she's putting that on pause to pursue her dreams of professional hockey. So kudos to her. I really hope that she does well, and we'll see how Minnesota looks with this dangerous lineup next season.
And even if she doesn't do well, she'll do pretty well in life. Again, coming out of medical school, that's impressive on its own, but to be able to keep up with medical school and still be a top-ranked pick is extremely impressive. The next 2 picks went to back-to-back Ohio State Buckeyes, who the Ohio State team dominated the draft as the Buckeyes had 8 members of their past year's roster drafted. That's 8 out of 20 possible skaters that are going in this year's draft. And Hannah Bilka was the 4th overall pick to Boston. Bilka finished 2023 with 48 points in 39 games, 22 goals, 26 assists, and an ACHA second team All-American. Also played in the IIHF World Championships with USA.
Yeah, Bilka, again, 48 points in 39 games, over a point per game in the ACHA, a very difficult conference in women's hockey. And again, Boston building on what they need. So they need point getters. And I think Bilka's really going to help them out. Again, put them alongside a Hillary Knight, a Lauren Gable, bona fide goal scorers, and see what happens. So excited to see that. And Boston, you got a good one.
Montreal trying to add to the overtime woes by getting a strong defenseman. They picked Kayla Barnes with the 5th overall selection. Both Bilka and Barnes represented Ohio State as WCHA All-Conference first-teamers. Barnes from the blue line tallied 36 points in 39 games. She was also a first-team selection with 11 goals and 25 assists, Jake. And that was the start of the defensive push here in the draft as a couple of defensemen back-to-back.
Yeah, and Barnes really did well. We watched her again against Clarkson in the Frozen Four this year. Both her and Bilka were really, really good on that defensive end. And again, the blue line for Montreal already has Erin Ambrose. Now they added Kayla Barnes. So I think it's going to be a really strong defensive push for Montreal. And Renee Desbiens in goal has got to be jumping up and down with excitement seeing this talent come to Quebec. So, again, excited to see what she does in Ohio State. Back-to-back picks in the first round.
The number 6 pick will be joining us momentarily here on the podcast. Julia Gosling sent to Toronto, which is the hometown team for her, a former London Devilette, and she will be playing just about 20 minutes up the road from there with PWHL Toronto. The forward from St. Lawrence joined Hockey Canada at the IIHF Women's World Championships as well. Her first time in that tournament after being recognized on the ECAC All-Conference second team. Gosling ranked top 15 in the NCAA in goals, assists, and points. She was fourth in the NCAA in power play points after a 51-point season, 22 goals and 29 assists. Finishes her 4 years at St. Lawrence over a point per game. Also 5'11", with not only the physicality and the physical presence, but a lot of skill and speed at that size that will go straight into Toronto's offense. And a team that had no problem scoring, they get a heck of a threat to add on to that list.
Yeah, Casey, and I think the other 5 teams are going to be heads on a swivel when Toronto's on a rush next year. I mean, you've got Sarah Nurse, you've got Natalie Spooner, and now you've got Julia Gosling, and all 3 bona fide goal scorers. Gosling, we saw her a lot down in Canton, right down the road, and she is the real deal. Toronto really got a good one. Also got some international experience in the rivalry series against Haley Wynn in USA, and I think that's going to help her here in the PWHL. A lot of skill, a lot of speed, and Toronto is going to see a lot of lamps light red when she gets the puck.
We kind of bat our eyes at the amount of skill that we see in and out all the time, every weekend watching the ECAC play, and the NCAA dominance in this draft really shows that 28 players out of the 42 selected came out of the NCAA. 12 of them were from the ECAC, which outside of Ohio State would have been the highest conference. The WCHA had 13 players drafted, but 8 of those come from the Buckeyes, and I'm going to take credit for a few of them. A lot of them are transfers. 2 of them are transfers from Clarkson that I think deserve to be, at least one of them in Markowski, who was a 4-year Golden Knight, should be under the ECAC tab there. Hockey East picks up 3, as all of them came from Northeastern. The top teams in the draft, Ohio State with 8, Colgate had 5, Northeastern had 3, Clarkson, Wisconsin, and St. Lawrence had 2. And again, that's off of the 2023-24 rosters. Jake, the second round, though, was the Swedish league. We saw 9 players come from Europe and decide to make the switch over out of the SDHL. 4 players came from other leagues. One really interesting one out of Concordia University, a draft pick that came in the 3rd round there. But when you look at, first off, Jake, the NCAA and the power pack skill that we get to watch all the time, but also want to ask what it says about the PWHL here and the power that this league has shown, where a year ago there was all kinds of question marks when the announcement came that the dueling leagues were going to get dissolved into one. A lot of people didn't know whether or not they were going to have a position on teams, whether or not there was even going to be a league worth playing in. Now you have all the Europeans seeing the success, the packed, sold-out crowds, and 9 players who all were IIHF representatives make the switch over from Europe to come to the PWHL. And that's only the 9 that got drafted. There's plenty more that were draft eligible. But we are now seeing the switch to come play in North America for this league.
Yeah, and I think it's just a testament to how well the PWHL has set themselves up for success, especially in attracting player talent. I mean, if we look at a year ago, I remember when we were talking to the girls on the Clarkson team about their plans after college, a lot of them were, if they wanted to pursue professional hockey, you really had to be in a national team system already. And then you might get picked up later on for the PWHPA or the PHF. But a lot of them would go overseas, like you said, to the Swedish league. Seen a couple from France, Czechoslovakia had a couple. And it's just really a testament to how well the PWHL set themselves up, especially in this first year. And the fact that they broadcast it around the world for everyone to see. I mean, their marketing was incredible, especially to young women around the world wanting to find some kind of pro outlet for hockey. And I mean, you look at the draft, and like you said, 28 NCAA players, they have a goal now to work towards, where before it was a little bit iffy, where if you wanted to go pro, you could, but there wasn't a lot of wiggle room, especially on those other leagues. But now there's a tangible kind of goal and a draft where you can hear your name called and understand that a franchise wants you and wants you to play for them. So I think that's huge, and I'm really excited to see how many more NCAA players make the jump to this level.
Women's sports gaining quite a bit of momentum, and certainly the league to watch right now is the PWHL. And again, the games will start back up in December. We'll be covering all that as it goes down. But the most exciting news that came out of the PWHL draft, and this is completely opinionated, is that the 6 teams will be designating themselves nicknames coming into the upcoming season. So we'll now see logos and new jerseys and all that exciting things rather than just PWHL city name. Now every team has a team nickname to look forward to. Those haven't been released yet. And Jake, hopefully the Fifth Liners podcast has some pull. So we'll close it out here by arguing for what we think should be the team names of each side. And I'll let you go first here, and we'll go straight down the same list that we just talked about. We'll start with Minnesota.
Yeah, I heard this one early in the PWHL, and it's the Purple Wave. And we've seen a couple wave teams like Tulane's the Green Wave down south. It's an ode to Jimi Hendrix's Purple Rain, but also to the Minnesota colors, purple. And I just think this is just cool, man. I mean, I haven't heard much purple-related team names. I mean, you kind of got the Jazz that have the purple in there out in Utah. It's not a professional team color that's very widespread. The Vikings is another one that could be up there, but I think the Purple Wave would be really cool.
I'm going to go with the Minnesota Storm. I did some research around a couple of my team names. This was not one that was too hard to research. And based out of the snowstorms that go through Minnesota, I think Minnesota Storm would be a pretty cool one. Next is Boston with the green colors. And Jake, the Boston Lions is your pick.
Yeah, I didn't really have too much of a opinion on Boston. They could go a lot of ways. I mean, you could go to the colonial era, but you already have the Patriots. You have the New England Revolution. You could go something like that. I chose the Lions just as like a little bit of an honor to the PHF Pride, the Boston Pride. They won the Isabel Cup a couple years while the PHF was still there, and maybe they're hoping for a little bit of success coming out of that name.
Kayla Friesen, a former interview of ours, a member of that Pride team that won it, and an up-and-coming coach who we might see in the PWHL sometime to come. I do like that one. Mine is the Boston Green Monster. Not too hard to figure out where that symbolic icon comes from. I dabbled in the revolutionary bids. I was going to go with Boston Tea Party, but I don't think that one will ever get picked. So for me, it's the Boston Green Monster in honor of the team color. I think that could be a pretty cool one, or the Boston Monsters. Next up is Montreal.
Yeah, Montreal. Whenever I think of Canada, I think of the Mounties, the Royal Mounted Police. So I'm thinking Montreal Mounties, the nice alliteration. Got to get an alliteration in here somewhere. I think it's only fair. We have a lot in professional sports already, so I think I just like the way it flows. Yeah, a little shout out to the Canadian Royal Mounted Police.
I'm saving my alliteration for the next one. This one took some heavy duty research from me. The official bird of Quebec is the snow owl. I'm going with the Montreal Snowbirds.
Okay.
Next is Toronto.
Yeah, Toronto, I didn't really have too much to think about. I think the one I've seen floating around recently is the Toronto Torch. And I think that would be cool. Again, another alliteration, but I don't know the significance around it. I only saw it on a couple of message boards or tweets, and it sounds cool. And I think they could do some really cool stuff with the design too.
Sarah Nurse was one of the headlining names that made the PWHL the way it is, and especially on the women's rights front with the player advocation and the players getting their media rights and all the behind the scenes work. She was one of the 5 women that was on the board that really made what we saw a success possible. So in honor of the trailblazing women that brought the success of the women's hockey to the city, I'm going with the Toronto Trailblazers. Next is Ottawa.
Ottawa. Okay, this one for me is a little bit of just like a word association for me, and it comes from the Canadian Hockey League, the Juniors League, the Oshawa Generals. I think the Ottawa Generals sounds like a little bit better, and like you said, the political. I think a little bit of an insight on yours, the political and social movements throughout the city's history. I think that goes. I don't know. I just like the way that flows, and it sounds cool.
Not sure if you saw what I had originally, but I was thinking Ottawa Senators. This was one that really stumped me for a while, and my original go was the Ottawa Parliament. I don't think that's going to be picked. I've upgraded it to the Ottawa Rebels, and again, as you mentioned, a city known for historic revolution and social movement, pushing the bar. The Ottawa Rebels, I think, would be a fitting name, especially as we look to kind of on the same note of Toronto, the women front running the movement of the women's rights and the push for equality in women's sports. Fitting name there. We'll finish it off here. One last team to cover, and the hometown team for you and I, not anymore for you as you're out in Cleveland now, but the original home of New York.
Yeah, New York for me. I went east with my team name, and I went with the Sounds, as in the Long Island Sound. So I was thinking almost like the Seattle Supersonics vibe, where it could be something of like a building or something monumental in New York, and not just the stereotypical like Manhattan vibe, but and also because they played a lot of their home games at the UBC Arena as well on Long Island. So I think that would be cool.
And my pick to close it off was the New York Empire. That would be an interesting one. The Empire State building, and also the creation of an empire for the future of the team coming up. We'll see if anybody from the PWHL is listening here, Jake, and maybe one of those names will be featured. But that does it for our PWHL segment. And buddy, it's a pleasure to be back on air here, even though it doesn't air live. But good to have you back, and a pleasure to welcome you to the podcast here. Many more to come.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. I appreciate it.
Coming up next is our interview with the number 6 overall pick and Julia Gosling. Stay tuned here on the Fifth Liners podcast. Pleased to welcome on the number 6 overall pick of the PWHL draft, and a player who I've unfortunately had to watch plenty of goals scored against my team, Julia Gosling. Julia, I appreciate you coming on and joining our first ever interview on the new podcast here. After being drafted, what are you spending the summer doing, getting prepared for your first year pro?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Casey. I'm just in London, Ontario for the summer, so training with a lot of younger guys and that play junior and OHL and looking to play in the A. So we have a good group over near me, and just going to start skating probably in July, just with the long off season, and just looking to get prepared for this new league. So I'm excited.
Joined with our media advisor, Matt Leonardo, as well, and excited to have our first big time guest here. Julia, on the international stage, your first international play came in the rivalry series between the USA and Canada. Talk about what it was like suiting up for the first time in the Canada jersey on the national stage. Obviously, you played through the U18, U20s, but being able to make it on the national team and the international stage, playing in the rivalry series, what was that like?
Yeah, it was awesome. My first rivalry series was actually when I got centralized. So that was the first time I played the US with the national team, and just the atmosphere and the buildings that we were at was incredible. And playing alongside many of these players I looked up to was just insane. Just Pooh's there, Spooner's there, Jenner, just people I watched growing up for a while. So it was truly an honor and just super fun to be with that group. And now having a couple rivalry series on my belt, it's been fun, and I feel like I've been getting more comfortable and confident.
Not only a player for the team, but you were able to score pretty quickly on the national stage. Walk me through the emotions there of your first goal that you scored for Team Canada.
Yeah, it was awesome. The first one at Worlds was pretty crazy, just with O'Neill playing with me, and we had some pretty good chemistry. She fed me a puck and just deked out the goalie. So it was definitely a fun experience with my family in the stands and Nicole being on the team. So it was definitely just a cool moment to get that under my belt, and especially at Worlds at such a big stage.
And Julia, a lot of players, and when I say a lot, I mean a lot, do not have the opportunity to be able to represent their country. Growing up, at what point did you think that this was going to be an opportunity for you?
Yeah, I didn't really know at first, like, if I'd be able to play for the national team. Obviously, it was always a dream to play for the Olympics. I was watching 2010, 2014 Olympics and just wanted to be a part of those groups. But I think it was once kind of in high school, I felt like I was getting better and better and playing on the top teams. I felt like it was an opportunity that I could get, but it ended up working out very well for me. I played U18s twice and then U20s and now with the national team. So definitely lucky and just trying to strive to go to the Olympics in 2026.
This year for the NCAA, you were 10th in the country in goals scored with 22, fourth most power play goals in the NCAA as well, 51 points in 37 games played for you. Your overall career at St. Lawrence, 111 games played, you put up 128 points, excuse me. So playing in the ECAC, tough competition every weekend, and at St. Lawrence, how did college hockey prepare you to be able to play now professional here, but also on the international stage?
Yeah, it's been huge for my development, and without my teammates and coaches, I definitely wouldn't be the player I am today. Definitely we grew as a program and got really good by the end. So it was fun just seeing my teammates grow as people and players, and then just my coaching staff putting all their effort and time into me and trying to make me a better player. So with the ECAC being so challenging and with our team, sometimes not always the strongest team, it definitely made me prepared for pro and just never being able to take off the gas. I was going every weekend and played a lot of minutes. So definitely developed a lot, especially these past 2 years when I was playing full seasons, and the ECAC has gone so strong and so many talented teams that are nationally ranked. So yeah, I definitely developed a lot just playing against tough competitors all the time. And it was definitely a fun league to play in.
Looking back at your time from St. Lawrence, what are going to be some of your favorite memories from playing in the ECAC?
Oh, wow. I have a lot. I would say my first one would be when we beat Clarkson 4 times during the COVID year. They were ranked higher than us, and just beating them 4 times in a row is obviously sweet with the rivalry. So that was pretty enjoyable, and our team loved that time. And then my other one would be when we swept Mercyhurst this year. We had all of our alumni come back, and even the founder of women's hockey at SLU. So we had a big crowd around, and we came back a 3-goal deficit. So it was pretty cool, and we scored an OT with 2 seconds left. So that, just the atmosphere of our rink was awesome. So those were probably my top 2.
Julia, this year you were selected to the IHF World Championship team, and you mentioned playing alongside your cousin Nicole there at Clarkson Golden Knight, who I've had the pleasure of watching quite a bit. The week in Utica, I was down there and got to see plenty of your family cheering you on there close to home and playing on USA soil. Talk about what it meant to you have to be able to have your family there for the whole week cheering you guys on, and also playing together with Nicole.
Yeah, it's definitely special. Obviously, most people don't play with their family very often, and especially at the national stage. So playing alongside her and seeing how she's grown as a player at Clarkson has been awesome. And finally playing with each other again was pretty fun. And just being on the ice together was pretty surreal. And having both of our families in the stands, they're just rooting for us and jumping up and down every goal. So it was definitely fun. And then our first pregame tournament, we both scored. So it was pretty funny that we both had to score in the same game. But yeah, it's definitely just super fun and special, and hopefully we can continue doing that.
You put up 2 goals in the tournament en route to Canada lifting the World Championship trophy, and you receive your first IHF gold medal. What was the moment like beating the USA there? You lost to them early in the tournament, but when it matters in the gold medal game, you knock them off on their home ice, and you're able to celebrate your first World Championship win.
Yeah, it was exciting. Definitely emotional. That whole game was an emotional roller coaster, just back and forth goals, and I got one myself, so I was just pumped. And I don't know, our team like had no quit, and I knew I had a feeling that we would win. And once we scored, it kind of was, I don't even remember the moment, but it was just really exciting, some tears of joy. And with my family right there, it was super fun to have them there. And winning with that team, it was a special group of players. And I just had a feeling from the end after we lost our first game against the US that we'd come back even stronger. And it worked out very well. To one world championship and 1 gold is a pretty good start. So just excited that I got to win the medal with Canada, and hopefully I can do it again.
And definitely a lot more big moments to come for your career. Take us back prior a little bit to those big moments before the game. Take us into the headset. What are you listening to before the game? Are you a pregame aux person? Or are you giving that off to somebody else? Talk to us. What kind of music are we listening to before the game?
Yeah, I'm not on aux. I haven't got the chance to be on aux yet. I wouldn't mind it, but probably I just use my AirPods, and I listen to a lot of remixes on SoundCloud, just different songs and different beats, kind of keeps me going. And then I always listen to Wins and Losses by Meek Mill. That's the last song I listen to every time, just has a little pretty good startup to listen to. So I only listen to like part of it, but that's kind of what I listen to.
You had 1 more year of eligibility. You decided to declare for the PWHL draft, and obviously it worked out pretty well for you. But walk us through the decision process that you decided not to go back to St. Lawrence, where you could have had 1 more year after a very successful year for the team and yourself as well. You decided to go pro, and now we'll look forward to the PWHL.
Yeah, it was definitely a tough decision. I had 2 great options in front of me, and SLU obviously was great for my development and had a great time, great coaches, great teammates. But in the end, my gut was telling me to go pro, like go challenge myself to the new level and play with the top of the top. So kind of just was a gut decision, and I'm going to miss SLU a lot, and they're definitely going to be talented next year. So just excited to watch them and get rolling into the pro league now.
You're selected in the first round, the 6th overall pick in the PWHL draft last week. Going into the draft, did you have any idea that you might be that high up in the first round there?
Yeah, I honestly didn't exactly know. I was hearing things about maybe you go first round, maybe second, maybe even third. So my head was kind of just waiting to see what happens. I definitely chatted with a couple teams and was hoping maybe they'd select me, but I didn't really care where I got selected. But it was definitely huge to be selected in the first round with all those incredible players, and it's just an honor to be selected first by Toronto. So I'm just excited for the market and the fan base and the team that I get to play with. So it'll be a fun ride.
Absolutely. And you mentioned you had chatted with a few teams. Talk to me a little bit about that pre-draft process, going through and chatting with those teams. I know it's a big, pre-draft questions is always an exciting thing to hear about. Any interesting questions that you heard during your conversations?
I didn't find they were too weird, just kind of like not like the NHL as much. It was more just getting to know me, like what kind of player I am, what I'm doing in the summer, like who, if you had to pick one person to play with for the rest of whatever your career, who would you pick or who would you not want to play against, stuff like that. So it wasn't anything too interesting, just more getting to know me and asking specific questions just because some of the GMs and coaches I've never talked to before. So it was more just, I don't know, getting to know exactly me as a person and a player. So nothing too much.
I guess now we got to hear the answers to those. So if you could play with anybody, who are you playing with, and who don't you want to play with out there?
Yeah, it's definitely a tough question because there's a million players I'd love to play with, but I picked as a line, I said O'Neill and Poulin. Just with O'Neill at Worlds, we had some pretty good chemistry, and then Poulin is just clutch, and I feel like I can read her pretty well too. So that's what I picked for my line. And then not playing against just people that are super hard to play against that I've played in college against a lot was, I did say Nicole, just she's hard to play against and she can read me perfectly. So it's definitely tough playing against her. And then I said Serdachny also, just I feel like she knows me and she puts on a new level when she plays against me, which I do too. So those are the two that I find are the toughest to play against and after college career too.
You guys made up a hell of a line, and it was a lot of fun to watch. A couple players that we typically don't like to watch have a lot of success together. For the PWHL now, you're headed to Toronto, somewhat of a hometown team here for you, and just a short trip down the QEW from London, Ontario, your hometown. What does it mean extra on top of not only getting drafted to the first round, but getting drafted to the hometown team where you're now going to be so close to home? All those people can come watch you and support you pretty frequently.
Yeah, it's definitely surreal. I didn't know exactly where I would end up, and I ended up the closest team to home. And obviously, my family's super excited. They're huge supporters of me, and they came to almost every SLU home game. So I know they'll definitely be at every Toronto game, especially now that it's so close. And my twin sister's actually at vet school at Guelph, so she's even closer, only like 40 minutes. So it'll just be huge that everyone can come watch me so easily and bring some Londoner fans up to Toronto too. And it'll just be exciting to see new faces in the stands and to watch how extremely gifted some of these players are and some of the teams we'll play against.
Watching the way this league blossomed over the first year of its existence, for a player like yourself and all the players in your situation getting drafted here this year, where it's always been a question mark with the future of women's hockey for the girls who aren't on the international stage like you've had the honor to do. But watching the success this league had, what extra excitement does that give you now heading into the PWHL this year after watching a couple of the sold out crowds, one of them being at Scotiabank, where I'm sure you'll have the opportunity to play coming up?
Yeah, definitely. I think maybe swayed a bit my decision to go pro after watching their success and how physical and fast the game was. I feel like it just made me want to challenge myself and get into it. But I went to even 2 Ottawa games and their fan base was incredible. And then you could even hear the fans in Montreal and Toronto. And it's just huge for women's hockey. And definitely have to thank the former players and the people who invested into it, and even the current players who made this league possible, because it was definitely very easy for us just to come out of college and go right into the draft to pro. So we're definitely super grateful, and it'll be fun to see how it grows and how many teams we'll end up having in the future.
We'll close on this one here. And for those listening, as we watch your first season as a professional, what are some goals that you are looking to accomplish coming up as you turn full-time pro towards Toronto?
Yeah, I haven't thought of that too much yet. Obviously, there'll be a slight adjustment going into it, but I think just having an impact on my team right away, offensively, bringing pucks to the net a little more and trying to get my shot off. And don't really have any particulars for points or anything like that. Just want to kind of take it slow and get into it, and maybe those will come as I go. But just making a difference and learning from the coaches and all the players, and hoping just to get a little more physical and trying to get my shot off a little more. So those are probably my main little goals, I guess.
Julia, we appreciate you taking the time to come on as our first podcast guest here. And I can't say I'm not looking forward to seeing you play in Shield Arena next year, but definitely looking forward to watching your success now as a pro, that we can root for you without shame. Congrats on the gold medal, and good luck in everything coming up here in the first year.
Yeah, thank you so much. Definitely an honor to be the first guest. So thanks again.
Big thanks to Julia for hopping on, and we'll close it off here with our last of the day, impressed or depressed. And a lot of news flying around the NHL now that the season's starting to come to a close. And as we get close to the NHL draft coming up the end of this week, it starts on Friday. Trades have been flying. And Matt, that's the topic for today. Are you impressed or depressed with these NHL trades? And we'll break down what we've got so far. These are the blockbusters. We'll leave out the trade picks and the rights and anything that doesn't involve big name players. But we'll start one that happened back towards the start of the postseason, and Nashville sends Ryan McDonough and a 4th-round pick to Tampa Bay. Tampa has to send a 7th round for 2024 and a 2nd round in 2025. Matt, who are you impressed and who are you depressed with? Who you think are the winners and losers out of this one?
I think a winner here is Ryan McDonough. I think, he was pretty unhappy with his situation in Nashville. I think they were kind of suppressing his minutes in a situation where I think they could have gotten a lot more out of McDonough. I know he's aging, but, he's a really solid two-way defenseman that can even make a little bit of an impact on your second power play. And for a team like Nashville, who, they have a pretty solid decor, but they definitely didn't need to suppress those minutes. I think McDonough's going to love being back in Tampa where he was on those cup teams and really making a huge impact there. And I think in terms of a loser here, what's Nashville going to do on the left side now? It's a team that has Roman Josi at the top there, but, a lot of their guys, when you think into who else is playing on that decor is over on the right side. So I think it'll be interesting to see how they fill that void. But, obviously getting a 2nd-round pick, it doesn't hurt too bad. So I would say for the big winner here, personally, I think Ryan McDonough is the big winner of this trade going back to Tampa Bay.
And for McDonough, they said he had given a request that if it was ever possible to get him back to Tampa, that's where he wanted to go. He gets sent back. So an all-around good story. Ryan McDonough, obviously a personal winner as well. And June 19th was when the trades really started flying a couple days ago, about a week ago now, as this podcast drops. And Calgary and New Jersey making big news, a trade that had been talked about a little bit right around the deadline. They couldn't get done. And now Jacob Markstrom is officially a Devil. The Flames in return get Kevin Ball and a 1st-rounder coming up this year. The Devils get the goaltender they need. I'm torn on this one. I think Craig Conroy, after taking over the Flames, and they've said it's somewhat of a rebuild process here, he now has 9 first-round picks coming up over the next 4 years, which is an outstanding number of high-level prospects they're going to have a chance to take on. Also, while dishing out some of these big players, he's brought in a lot of youth and some top-level talent that are active NHL guys. So I'm not as down on the Calgary side, but certainly for the Devils, this is exactly what they need. And I think it immediately puts the Devils in a playoff spot for next year. Kevin Ball, not a guy that played huge minutes for them, a big body and a young player who a lot of people say is really good around the locker room. So obviously going to be a great ad for Calgary. But for the Devils, the goaltending was the reason Lindy Ruff got fired this year. They now get Jacob Markstrom, who's notably a top tier goaltender in the NHL. I think New Jersey wins this trade.
Yeah, Casey, and I think after Martin Brodeur, right, it's been a huge who is the guy. They've brought in guys like Corey Crawford, and they've had Mackenzie Blackwood and Vitek Vanashek. Like, nobody's really filled those shoes, and you're not going to draft a goaltender that's going to make an impact like Jacob Markstrom at the 10th overall spot. You think it's a pretty big thing to deal. There's been swings, there's been misses at the 10th overall pick. Obviously, the higher you go up in the draft, the more likely you're going to hit on somebody. But I think for a team that had a slumped year last year, but this is their window. They've got, a ton of scoring up front with Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier and Jesper Bratt. And you look at that defense and Dougie Hamilton's kind of like the face of that decor. You really start to think like, this is the New Jersey window when a lot of those young guys are on their ELCs and aren't, asking for $9, $10, $11 million. So getting a guy like Markstrom to hold the fort down in the back end is just what the Devils needed here to be back and competing. And if you're Calgary, they knew for a while that Markstrom was going to be somebody who's probably going to be moved. There's kind of going to be a goalie carousel of guys moving around. And for every team that's kind of selling one, there seems to be 1 or 2 teams that want one. So I think that the leverage here that they had was pretty incredible, and getting the 10th overall pick is an outstanding spot. So I think both teams really did well here, and we'll see how that works out for New Jersey, but especially Calgary with that 10th overall pick coming up on Friday.
right after that trade went down, a blockbuster between the LA Kings and the Washington Capitals, and one that made me spit take on whatever fluids I was drinking. I think that was during the heat wave that was coming through the Northeast here. So it was about a gallon of water every day for a little while there to make sure we were staying hydrated. But Pierre-Luc Dubois from the Kings to Washington, a 1-for-1 trade for goaltender Darcy Kemper. And this one was a head scratcher on why in the world the Washington Capitals would agree to this one. And the Kings get out basically unscathed, and they end up being major losers on last year's trade where they had to give up Iafallo and all the young talent to get Dubois. But now Dubois, with 7 years remaining on an $8.5 million contract. Not only that, but as of July 1st, Dubois moves to a full no-move clause versus the no trade that kicks in 12 days after the trade went down. And also had the Stanley Cup reached Game 7, which it did end up happening. Excuse me. LA then, which now goes to the Capitals. The Capitals have now lost the right to buy him out at 1/3 the price. So for the Capitals, they've got him for 7 years at 8.5, and pretty much there's absolutely nothing they can do for it. And they give up goaltender Darcy Kemper. So there's two ways this goes. Dubois, just a 25-year-old guy. It could be an absolute hit if the talent that a lot of people think Dubois has can hit here. Washington could get a top level 1 or 2 C here, especially with the salary cap going up. 8.5 could end up being a deal, but for LA, they get out of that deal. And, LA seems like major winners here. They get a goaltender in Kemper who's not going to be a star-studded starter, but he's a Stanley Cup champion. Matt, where do your alliances lie here on the winners and losers?
I'm gonna be crazy here. I think it's a win-win trade. I think both teams end up coming out net positive. Starting with the Capitals, it's an interesting move for them to make. Obviously, they're kind of falling into that post-Ovechkin era of what really are the Capitals, like what their identity is. They snuck into the playoffs this year, kind of on a whim, one of, if not the worst team to ever make the playoffs. But the big issue was always the guys up the middle, right? No offense to Dylan Strome. I think he's a really solid player, and he's really showed up with the Capitals the past couple of years. That can't be your 1C. And I think getting a guy like Pierre-Luc Dubois, who does it on both ends of the ice, a really great two-way, big power forward, who really just didn't have an opportunity to flourish behind Phil Deneau and Andrei Kopitar in LA. I think this is a really good move for the Capitals to be able to get somebody who can kind of take over as that face. Like you mentioned, 25 years old, former 3rd overall pick. And, at some point you move a guy around 3 or 4 times, you start to wonder if he really could be that guy. Personally, I think at 25, I'm still a believer. And then you look at it from the Kings perspective, they had so much center depth and guys coming up too. They're picking Byfield out to the wing, which, I think you got to put him back in the middle and kind of shift things around. But you move on from that massive contract with no harm, no foul. At the end of the day, it does look pretty bad that you move, a guy like Gabe Vilardi and Alex Iafallo now for Darcy Kemper. An older goaltender who has some experience and had a lot of success with the Kings back in the late 2010s. But I think, again, with the goalie carousel, they were a team that could not go into the playoffs next year if that's their aspirations, relying on Cam Talbot and David Rittich. So I think for the Kings, you're in a really good spot here as well.
Not a blockbuster, but the same day, and one that pertains to your fandom here, the San Jose Sharks acquired Ty Dellandrea for a 4th rounder in 2025. And you got to pretty clearly feel that your team made out pretty well here.
Yeah, I mean, Dellandrea is a young guy who just really didn't have a spot opening up for him in Dallas with the guys like Wyatt Johnson and Logan Stankoven kind of taking over those top 6-minute roles, and even guys coming up like Maverick Bork and Antonio Stranges. So I think moving him, it kind of makes sense if you're Dallas. And if you're San Jose, I mean, you got to get guys who can play hockey at the NHL level. Once you have Macklin Celebrini and Will Smith on the team, you can't be putting out an AHL roster anymore. So I think a guy like Dellandrea gets an opportunity to maybe play some middle six and get some power play opportunity. So I'm personally pretty excited for it.
Another big one that unfortunately I don't have the insider rights to, but I was texting you over the weekend after talking to a connection in the Ottawa organization that they were planning to go big on a goaltender, and that broke quite quickly after you and I were talking about that. Ottawa goes out and grabs Linus Ullmark from an divisional rival there in Boston. Boston acquires Joonas Korpisalo, Mark Kostelic, in a first round in the upcoming 2024 draft. They'll have the 25th pick overall on Friday night. And, in my opinion, Ottawa makes out huge. It'll be interesting to see how Ullmark can hang in there with an Ottawa team that's very tough for goaltenders to adjust to. And we saw Korpisalo have a heck of a number of troubles getting acclimated into that lineup. But for Ullmark, a guy who's really made his name with Boston here, and unfortunately Swayman was just as good and better playing for the Bruins. So Ullmark now goes to Ottawa, and for Ottawa, I think the next step is going to be to get some grit back on the defensive line. In my opinion, Boston did not get enough at all here in Ullmark. There was talks that Shabbat or one of the other defensemen might get thrown into the package. Korpisalo, I don't think is equal at all with Ullmark. You get Kostelic, who's up and coming still, and a late first round pick, which you never know if that's going to pan out. So I think Ottawa really in the plus here, and a team I'm extremely impressed with on that trade.
Yeah, obviously, if you're Ottawa, you're pretty happy coming out with an upgrade, to say the least, at goaltending. If you look just at the stats last year, I think it's an interesting thing that you mentioned to see, if Ullmark's going to be the answer, if at some point, Ottawa's going to have to figure out it's the coaching and the system that's not really working for goaltenders here. But looking at it from Boston's perspective, obviously you kind of hope to get more. I think Mark Kostelic is somebody who kind of fits that mold pretty well of a guy. Look at somebody like Trent Frederick, just kind of fits that mold of bottom six, physical, tough guy, like really pesky to play against. You get another goaltender to kind of have some insurance at 25% retained as well. So you're not eating too much of that, but I wouldn't be shocked if we see Korpisalo moved elsewhere, if the Bruins are looking for some salary cap to bring a guy back, potentially like Jake DeBrusk. And then you mentioned the 25th pick. It's almost like a magic bean, right? Like last year, I believe the 25th overall pick was Sam Renzel, or maybe 2 years ago. And he's looked to be a pretty solid defenseman for the University of Minnesota the past few years. But you've got guys who've been drafted there, guys like Dominic Bach and Riley Tufts who just didn't find their way. But you also got a guy, and Bruins fans are probably pretty familiar with him, 617 points over his first 592 career games with the Boston Bruins, and David Pastrnak. So I think when you get a draft pick like that and you hit on it, it makes this trade look a lot better. So this will be a fun trade tree to kind of follow in 5 or 6 years and see where that 25th overall pick can go. But I think at surface level, if you have to pick a winner, it's tough not to say the Ottawa Senators here.
The second time the San Jose Sharks come up here, and today picking up a salary dump, the second trade that Detroit made to get some salary freed up. And for San Jose, they acquired Jake Wallman and a second rounder in the upcoming draft for future considerations. And the Gritty is making its way cross country as it heads into San Jose.
Yeah, he'll gritty his way across the plane over to the Bay Area. I'm pretty excited for this one as well. Like I mentioned with the Dellandrea deal, we need guys that can play at the NHL level. And Jake Wallman has experience playing with Moritz Seider. I think it's a really good opportunity on the left side to potentially get some power play minutes as well. I think last year we were rolling out, and I say we as a Sharks fan, I gotta throw that out there, but they were rolling out guys like Matt Benning and Kalen Addison on the power play, which I don't think it's going to cut it, if they're going to start to compete in a year or two, hopefully. So I think being able to get the 53rd overall pick as well on taking that salary cap, I think it's a big win for the Sharks. And I'm not going to say anything yet on the Detroit front. I really do believe that Detroit's going somewhere big with this. The first name that kind of came to my head was Jacob Chikrin as somebody to kind of replace where Jake Wallman was on the left side, and somebody who I think would pair really well with Mo Seider, because it seems like they've been looking for that guy for quite some time. And, at time and time again, if you're going to try and go cheap with that, it might not always work out. But I don't think Detroit's done here. I think they're going to make a few more moves to gain some more salary cap and really make a huge splash here. So I'm interested to see where that goes. So I don't want to call it a loss for them just yet. But if they strike out on that opportunity, then this is a pretty tough giving up a late second round pick.
Forgot to mention it at the top of the segment, but had to change into the Minnesota Wild jersey because Matt was looking so stunning in his Golden Gophers, and the state of hockey. We'll see where they go this summer. A big offseason coming up. A busy week here on the Fifth Liners podcast as the Stanley Cup has gone the distance and did not give us too much time to prepare for episode 3, which will be coming up in just 2 days from the time this one drops here as of Wednesday, the 26th. Coming back to you Friday, Matt will be back on the show as we break down the upcoming 2024 NHL Draft. And out in Vegas Friday night, we'll see who the next stars to come. And we'll also welcome Christian Humphreys, who is expected to go up in the top rounds of this draft as a guest onto the show. And then Monday, July 1st, we'll either break it into 2 episodes or one big mega free agency episode. We're going to go through every single one of the 32 teams and break down their free agents, their upcoming signings, and where we think certain players will fit into rosters. Before we get into the summer schedule, we're excited to have a long list of guests coming up. We're going to go after July 1st, 1 episode every 15 days, and we'll be bringing on guests throughout the summer. We'll have a couple of Stanley Cup champions coming up, a couple of other NHL personalities, and all kinds of content as we await the start of the 2024-25 season. Matt, I was hoping last night's game was going to get there to overtime and that Edmonton would give us one more just so we could enjoy a little more hockey. But fortunately, we have the podcast to carry us through, and it's going to be a long couple months here as we await opening day coming up in October of 24.
Yeah, I think the entire country was rooting for some extra hockey other than some of the Florida fans like Jenna we were talking to earlier. But as we await the long, gruesome summer that we just want to see some stick and puck. So, yep, we'll be back all summer, getting some really awesome guests on the show and providing some content to kind of hold everybody over. And I'm really excited for what next season is going to come. So,
partner, 2 nights here that you don't have to hear my voice before we'll be back at it Friday. What's coming up for the week for you up in Boston?
Not much out here. We had the parade this past week. Pretty exciting times here. Coming up with the 4th of July, our firm shuts down, so we'll have the week off and gonna do a little vacationing and maybe some relaxing here and there, but we'll see. So a lot of big things going on in Boston, obviously with the Celtics parade, and summer's around the corner, so it's a lot of fun out here.
Indeed, it is. Big thank you to everybody who tuned in, and as well our staff here on the show. Colin's out calling baseball games across the Midwest, and looking forward to whenever his next appearance can come. And our thoughts are with George, who's out dealing with a family matter, and hopefully we'll have him back as soon as we can as well. Matt, thanks to you as well. Jake, who joined on for the PWHL segment, and big congratulations to Jenna Bonomo and her Florida Panthers as she heads down to Sunrise to go celebrate with the team as the Florida Panthers are the 2024 Stanley Cup champions for the first time in their franchise. Again, a big thank you to all the listeners. Join us once again coming up on Friday as we preview the NHL Draft. For now, that does it. This has been another episode 2 of the Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast. We'll be back in a couple of days. See ya.